CCP leader Xi Jinping sent out an alert telling China's Marines to, quote, prepare for war. This comes as the U.S. is allegedly moving forward with its arms sales to Taiwan. Meanwhile, there are now rumors circulating over the health of Xi Jinping after he was seen coughing during a live broadcast speech, which was immediately deleted afterwards by Chinese state media. And we'll also be speaking with Jarret Stepman about President Trump's recent bans on critical race theory trainings in U.S. government agencies. Welcome back, everyone. First off, some breaking news. CCP leader Xi Jinping sent out an alert on October 13 telling the country's Marines to, quote, prepare for war. According to Taiwan News, which cited a Chinese military publication, Xi was conducting an inspection of the People's Liberation Army Navy Marine Corps base in Chaozhou City on China's southeast coast. Xi told the troops they, quote, must focus your minds and energy on preparing for war and maintain a high state of alert. He added that the CCP's Marines have the duty of protecting the regime's, quote, sovereignty, security, territorial integrity, maritime interests, and overseas interests, which, as Taiwan News notes, are subtle references to the South China Sea and to Taiwan, which the CCP claims ownership over. She also stressed the Communist Party's control over the military. He said the CCP has, quote, absolute leadership over the armed forces, and that its troops need to, quote, be absolutely loyal, pure, and reliable. Now, this happens as the United States is allegedly moving forward with arms sales to Taiwan, which include drones and a coastal defense missile system. Reuters published an exclusive report on the claim, which it attributed to an unnamed source allegedly familiar with the situation. And this follows a Pentagon approval in July for a $620 million upgrade package for surface-to-air missiles to Taiwan. Now, Reuters reported at the time that China's Defense Ministry said it opposed the sale and claimed it would damage the stability of relations between China and Taiwan and between the CCP and the United States. And as the CCP warns against the arms sale, and as Xi told the PLA Marines to prepare for war, the Chinese regime also released video footage of a large-scale military exercise using live ammunition, which simulated them invading an island. Alongside this, it also aired a video of an imprisoned Taiwanese businessman giving a public confession where he admitted to spying. Now again, what are we seeing here? When it comes to this video the CCP aired of them doing this invasion of an island, it's of course a very direct reference to Taiwan, Taiwan being an island nation, and the CCP talking right now most of its propaganda about possibly retaking Taiwan, about separatism as they call it, Taiwan trying to be an independent country, and as the U.S. and other countries are starting to engage diplomatically to an extent with Taiwan, which the CCP fears would legitimize Taiwan on the international scene, and which would in turn delegitimize the CCP's authority over China. Keep in mind, Taiwan used to be recognized as the official government of China. The Chinese Communist Party was seen as the unofficial government. And also there's concern that Taiwan can meet with the same fate as Hong Kong. Remember, Hong Kong, although it was technically part of China, had this one country, two systems policy. Hong Kong was supposed to be a free and democratic region. The Chinese Communist Party overnight ended that. And many people in Taiwan are worried the CCP may make them next. Meanwhile, there are now rumors circulating over the state of CCP leader Xi Jinping's health. During a speech on October 14th, marking the 40th anniversary of the Shenzhen Special Economic Zone, Xi was seen coughing several times, and he also paused many times during the video, suggesting he might be out of breath. Now, after the video was published in a live broadcast, the CCP's state-run CCTV news station deleted the video.
我们坚定不移奉行互利共赢的开放战略，既从世界吸取发展动力，也让中国发展更好地惠及世界。构建共商共建、共享共赢的新格局。女士们、先生们、同志们， 广大党员干部要坚定理想信念，更新知识观念，掌握过硬本领，自觉站在党和国家大局上想问题、办事情。中国特色社会主义是物质文明和精神文明全面发展的社会主义。
And in China, with the CCP virus, there are ongoing lockdowns around the country. In Qingdao City, which we reported on previously, the local epidemic prevention authorities stated, quote, "The epidemic exposed the shortcomings and loopholes in the epidemic prevention and control of our city," and gave orders to implement the instructions from Xi Jinping to control the epidemic and to, quote, "keep in a wartime state at all times." Now, new data is also showing the extent of the CCP's cover-up of the virus in China. Now, among these documents obtained by the Epoch Times is hospital data, which shows that at least one patient with the CCP virus symptoms was treated in September 2019. And by October 2019, hospitals in Wuhan, which again was the epicenter of this virus, reported several deaths from severe pneumonia, lung infections, and other symptoms that are in line with the novel coronavirus. And as the Epoch Times notes, the city's health commission only publicly announced the outbreak of the novel coronavirus. That was December 31st, 2019. And that was only after social media posts by a whistleblower doctor had gone viral. Now, it's been over a year, and the world still hasn't been given clear answers about the virus, where it comes from, what the, say, intermediary species was, if it did come from animals, how to handle it, how to deal with it, or the true situation of the virus in China. The world has not been given clear answers from the Chinese Communist Party. Instead, the Chinese Communist Party has tried to write off responsibility, has attacked countries when they call for investigations into the origin, and has even blamed the outbreak on other countries while trying to cover up what happened within its own borders. The Chinese Communist Party is trying to shift the blame. It's saying the United States covered up the virus, when in reality, the Chinese Communist Party was covering up this virus since around at least December 2019 and as early as September 2019. The CCP at the time was lying to the world. And when news finally came out, when people broke the story, whistleblowers broke it, the CCP punished the whistleblowers. The world was lied to by the Chinese Communist Party, and its lies were spread as well through the World Health Organization. Many countries based their response on how to respond to this virus again, based on what the WHO was telling them. And the CCP was the one whispering in the WHO's ear that whole time. And where are we now? It's been a year now, and the world is still not being given answers on where this virus came from. If it did come from an animal origin, like the Chinese Communist Party claimed, if it did come from a species of bat or another animal being an intermediary for that to spread to humans, that animal is still not being dealt with. The origin is still not being dealt with, and until that is dealt with, the virus will very likely not be stopped. The world is waiting to have access to China to find out where this virus came from, and the CCP is still preventing that from happening. And in addition to this, any speculation, any reporting on where the virus might have come from, if it wasn't from animal origin, if, for example, it leaked from a laboratory, which is one of the theories going around, which we've shown evidence of before, doesn't necessarily mean it's man-made. It could have been a virus they had at these laboratories that got out. Any reporting on that is being censored by Western institutions. And so there are cover-ups in China and there is censorship in the West, preventing us from even looking into where this virus came from, while the whole world is dealing with it. Now, meanwhile, outside China, over 30,000 medical doctors and health scientists have now signed a declaration against the use of lockdowns to control the CCP virus, stating that the lockdowns are causing irreparable damage. Now, this petition is co-authored by epidemiologists and professors at Harvard, Stanford, and at Oxford. It states, quote, "Coming from both the left and right and around the world, we have devoted our careers to protecting people. Current lockdown policies are producing devastating effects on short and long-term public health." Now remember, the Chinese Communist Party's model for fighting this virus is the lockdowns. That is the CCP's model, and many parts of the world adopted the CCP's model for dealing with this. Does that mean it's the best model? doesn't mean it's the effective model. Well, the problem was this. During the early days of the outbreak, the WHO was telling the world the CCP had it under control. The Chinese Communist Party was telling the world it had the situation under control. There was nothing to worry about. There was no human-to-human transmission. It was not going to spread to other countries. The Chinese Communist Party lied to the world. It was lying to the WHO, and the WHO repeated those lies. The model of dealing with this virus outbreak was based on those lies. And many countries and many cities in the US have adopted that CCP model. And even the WHO is now opposing the lockdown measures. Even the WHO now is saying it should be a last resort or a supplementary resort, but not as the main method of trying to prevent the spread of this virus. And now for the broader stories for today. Now, first off, the true situation of China's economy is hidden away from public knowledge. But we can look at recent statements from CCP leader Xi Jinping and Chinese Premier Li Keqiang for a sense of what's really going on in China. Chinese state media People's Daily published an article titled "Consumption Becomes the Main Engine of China's Economic Growth," which praised Xi Jinping's plan of internal circulation, as they're calling it, as a, quote, guidance for expanding consumption and of having boosted confidence. Now, that's in line with Xi's recent moves to promote the idea of domestic circulation in the economy. In other words, getting people in China to spend money within the Chinese economy, not send their money abroad, not save it. It's the idea of going to restaurants, buying Chinese products, buying Chinese goods, supporting local businesses so that money circulates internally within their own economy. And that's not been happening for a long time. Now, at the same time, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang held a video symposium of key persons in charge of local governments on the economic situation, where he reiterated that the current domestic and internal environment in China is complicated and grim, and that governments at all levels must, quote, persist in living a tight life. He said they must, quote, tighten up expenditure and provide financial services to more small and medium enterprises that are facing difficulty. Now, at the same time, he also promoted economic reform and opening up the country by expanding the import and export space and other similar measures. Now, again, this goes back to the conflict between Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang. The CCP, they have these internal conflicts within these different factions of China. Li Keqiang is in charge of the State Council, one of the top branches of the Chinese Communist Party. Xi Jinping is in charge of the CCP itself, which means he's also in charge of Li Keqiang. But Li Keqiang has been pushing back against him. This is one of a few key power struggles in China right now, and one at the top levels of the CCP. Now, when it comes to what they're saying, it sounds like they're saying very similar things, but the details are what's important. Xi Jinping is talking about helping the Chinese economy bounce back by saying it's in a good state, you can spend money in the Chinese economy, we need internal circulation to help businesses, to help products, to help markets bounce back. And he's also talking about stabilizing the country, stabilizing its economy. When it comes to, again, they're facing sanctions, they're facing different countries pulling supply chains out of China. He's talking about stabilizing those markets. Li Keqiang is going the opposite direction. Instead of spending money within the Chinese economy, instead of internal circulation, he's telling people to tighten their belts. He's telling people to save money. And also, when Li Keqiang is talking about using state funds to bail out these small and medium businesses, Xi Jinping's policy right now is different. He's talking about a mixed economy, a mixed model when it comes to small and medium businesses, where the CCP itself brings these companies under part state ownership. So again, this ties to the broader battle between Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang. Li Keqiang has been challenging the authority of Xi Jinping. And keep in mind, he's not a good guy either. Within the Chinese Communist Party, it's not, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. The CCP has many different branches, and a lot of them are just as bad as the next. Now, both of these point to a difficult economic situation in China. Both of their statements suggest the Chinese economy is not doing as well as what they've been telling the rest of the world. You might remember they had these different narratives pushed to their state-run media to get foreign investors to put money back into China. And based on that, they were telling people that the Chinese economy was on the rebound. Statements within the CCP, documents within the Chinese Communist Party leaked that we've received and talked about. And also statements from their top leaders like Li Keqiang and like Xi Jinping are telling a very different story. Now, in the United States, religious groups are suing their local governments for lockdown restrictions, which they believe have violated protections on religious liberty. Epoch Times reports that in California, a pastor in Silicon Valley is fighting back against more than $200,000 in fines for keeping his church open. A Los Angeles church is pushing back against city efforts to shut down their church. In New York, the Catholic community and the Jewish community are filing lawsuits against Governor Andrew Cuomo for his restrictions on religious services, and similar cases have been emerging across the nation. This is bringing attention to one of the main battles in the United States right now, which is, do we follow the China model, or do we follow this model of opening up that is based in the Western principles? Do we follow the CCP's model of lockdowns, or do we have an open model? Which is more effective when dealing with this virus? And the White House is also noting the shift in narrative that lockdowns are harmful. You might remember reporting the WHO has recently changed its narrative. It's saying lockdowns should be used sparingly and also for short periods of time and not for a main model of contesting the spread of the virus. Again, that is a Chinese Communist Party's model, one the WHO actually praised originally. But as new data has emerged and as new research is showing, the model of lockdowns may be more harmful than beneficial. Now, during a conference call, a senior administration official with the White House told reporters that, quote, worldwide endorsement by the science community at the highest levels aligns very strongly with what the president has said for months. Now, again, when it comes to these lockdowns, different studies have shown that areas with tighter lockdowns seem to fare worse than areas in the U.S. with lighter lockdowns. And this isn't based on population either. It's based on the data of the deaths given the population. And many of the places with the tightest lockdowns, California, New York, they sent mixed messages. Well, on one hand, they're not allowing people to worship. They're not allowing people to gather to pray. But at the same time, they're allowing mass protests and riots. They're allowing people to gather in large numbers for these protests and riots, while telling people they cannot gather for their churches. Again, it's a mixed message, suggesting this is more political than it is about protecting people. And meanwhile, there are more updates on the Crossfire hurricane investigations, where the individuals behind the Trump-Russia investigations are themselves now being investigated for possible crimes in creating that narrative. During his October 12th rally in Florida, President Donald Trump told the crowd that he will take care of the people involved in the 2016 spy probe after the election. Now, a few days prior to this, Trump told radio host Rush Limbaugh that he was disappointed to hear that Attorney General W.A.R. had allegedly told lawmakers that U.S. Attorney General John Durham's report on the Trump-Russia investigations would not be released until after the 2020 election. Trump said, quote, "I think it's a terrible thing, and I'll say it to his face." Yet it seems there is some movement to get some information out before the elections as well. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said on October 9th that the State Department will likely be releasing the emails of former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton before the presidential elections on November 3rd. Pompeo told Fox News, quote, "We've got the emails, we're getting them out, we're doing it as fast as we can." Clinton had used an unauthorized private email server for government work, and it kept classified information on it that could have been exposed to foreign adversaries. Now also, an investigation has shown another claim used in the Trump-Russia narrative is false. Epoch Times reports that a 3-year probe by a British data watchdog found there was no evidence that Cambridge Analytica had colluded with Russia to interfere in any political process. Now remember, that digital marketing firm had been hired by the 2016 Trump-Russia election campaign and was used to frame some of these Trump-Russia narratives. That narrative using that company is now shown to be false. And lawmakers are also pushing forward now with their own investigations into the Trump-Russia narrative, which includes possible wrongdoings in the Obama administration's intelligence community. Republican Senator Chuck Grassley and Representative Ron Johnson sent a letter on October 7th to CIA Director Gina Haspel, expressing their frustration that she has not provided documents on the Russia probe they had requested more than 2 months ago. They said in the letter, quote, "Your staff met only once with our staff to discuss these requests, and CIA has not produced a single document in response." They added that, quote, "Further delay is unacceptable." Now, folks, President Donald Trump recently banned critical race theory trainings for U.S. government employees and for federal contractors. Supporters for these programs say they teach racial tolerance, but Trump said they are indoctrination programs that spread divisive and harmful ideologies on gender and race. Now, to learn more about these programs, We've invited to speak with us Jarret Stepman, who's a Daily Signal columnist and the author of The War on History, The Conspiracy to Rewrite America's Past. Let's jump into that now. Jarret Stepman, great having you on Crossroads.
Oh, thank you very much.
So one of the big things Trump is doing right now is he's going against these critical race theory training courses being given to government offices. And the way it's being framed is different depending on which side of the aisle you're on. A lot of, say, Democrats are saying that he's getting rid of these race sensitivity trainings. I know a lot of your work has been around investigating these exact issues, and I know you've done some interesting works on it. So tell us first off, what is critical race theory, and what do these trainings entail?
Yeah, I think to really call it sensitivity training, it really doesn't explain what critical race theory is. Now, this was a set of ideas that was actually originally developed in the 1970s. There was a Harvard professor named Derek Bell who was very famous for creating these ideas. They were mostly ensconced in narrow corners of academia for the last 30, 40 years. And I think what they really boil down to is that every issue, every single thing is defined by your race. I mean, this is where we get the idea that America is inherently a white supremacist society, that America is inherently racist. Everything is boiled down essentially to your skin color, to your identity. I mean, individual preference, individual choice, merit, things like this. All these things are seen as simply non-determinative factors. They're actually seen in some cases, according to the latest round of the critical race theorists, as it's racist to even talk about these things, to talk about the individual merits of a person. That in itself is racist. So you get all these differing theories that kind of stems from this, where you've changed even the definition of, for instance, the word equality. No, equality is out now. Now we have words like equity, which means in any given profession or field, if you don't have exactly proportional numbers by race, that is an example of systemic racism. And this all boils down again to these theories of critical race theory developed in the 70s.
Now, one of the big points that's being criticized on, Trump has written about it, of course. He's talked about it, for example, saying white people are racist, that, you should not judge a person by the color of their skin, but white people are evil and this and that. It does seem, based on some of the writings, and, just based on what I've seen, it does seem based on the idea of, ironically, segregation and judging people by the color of their skin, using that as the goal of the narrative, but saying the opposite while they're doing it. They're saying on one side racism is bad, judging people by their race is bad, discriminating by race is bad, at the same time saying we need to identify people by their race, divide society according to people's race, as you explained, and also really demonizing an entire race of people, in this case white people. Is this an accurate, let's say, summing up of what this is? Is this accurate?
Yeah, it's frankly, it's 100% accurate, especially if you read the writings of, I think, maybe the foremost, at least most public critical race theorist in the country, the so-called anti-racist Ibram Kendi, who basically says straight up, discrimination is a good thing. Color blindness is racism, and everything in society is defined by a person's race, by their background. It's no surprise that many of them even support ideas that sound very much segregationist. They're ideas that if you are of one race or you have another race, you have inherent qualities. That's something that very much flips frankly, the entire American project, the Declaration of Independence, this country, I think most Americans hope we are moving to. This puts it in a reverse direction. It puts it in a very different one. There's ideas that this idea that we have equality of the law that'll be applied to everyone, that's thrown out the window, because that could create inequities. That could create these problems that the critical race theorists think are at the very heart of American society. And so you now have a variety of intellectual projects promoting this that have become mainstreamed. I think very prominently the so-called 1619 Project in the New York Times, which I think uses a lot of critical race theory in creating this kind of warped, distorted view of American history as nothing but a series of racist acts, all boiling down to the fundamental original sin of slavery. And that's all it comes down to. No other issue matters other than racism and anti-racism. There's only two sides, according to the critical race theorists, which again, I think creates a kind of simplified view of humanity and human history.
Now, one of the things it's being accused of as well is pushing this radical worldview in terms of one that views, again, the entire history of the United States as being defined by race and by racism, which is 1619 Project essentially. I understand, though, now when we get to the, say, foundations of critical race theory, in my understanding, it goes to two places. One would be Howard Zinn, of course, and his reframing of the American history, and also the idea of critical theory, which was a Frankfurt School system, teaching basically, in my analysis, taking the ideas of Marx of the class struggle, the bourgeois against the proletariat, and framing it in terms of every division of individuals, whether it be race, gender, etc. Is this an accurate personification of what this really is?
Yeah, I think they've really married a lot of classically socialist or Marxist ideas and kind of jammed the old-fashioned, kind of economic class conflict into various other conflicts. It's race against race. It's gender against gender. I think these ideas absolutely pour forth from those like Herbert Marcuse, who was very prominent in the 1960s and early 1970s. In those days, we saw a lot of violence. We saw a lot of identity politics. These things kind of went a little bit underground. They kind of retreated back into the university system. But I think that's all pouring out now. I think you have a generation of younger Americans who were raised with things like Howard Zinn. A lot of these ideas have made their way into prominent, I would say, mainstream liberal institutions, the New York Times, the Washington Post. A lot of the younger reporters and a lot of those people have adopted these ideas wholesale from the academy. And I don't think you have a lot of opposition to ideas that at one time were very marginal, were very secondary. I mean, these were seen as radical ideas that distorted the truth. Now they're being treated as if they're mainstream. So we've injected Marxism into America through the prism of race, class, well, really not class, just race and gender at this point. Class has kind of been thrown by the wayside to the point where you even get some strange absurdities like the Worldwide Socialist website, which I thought was amusing, denouncing the 1619 Project because they said it'll create racial divisions in this country, which I think was quite a remarkable thing. But they were right on that. They were wrong on all the other economic theories, but they were right in that it does create, I think, a permanent intractable division between Americans that can really only end up in two places. It ends up with either tyranny or violence. And I think that that's the logical conclusion of where these ideas go. They don't go to a society of equality under the law or a constitutional system that we enjoy. It turns into something very ugly. It pits Americans against Americans. It puts us on a very, very different path.
Now, that said, folks, are broadcasting 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. And also on Sundays, I do a live Q&A, 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So be sure to tune in for that. Also, if you want to support us, please consider joining us on Patreon. You can find the link to our Patreon page in the description below. If you haven't already, please also don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps this channel. And if you want to go the extra mile, you can share this video with a friend or family member. Now, that said, folks, again, please take care of yourselves, stay healthy, and stay free.